You're listening to the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast, a podcast which features students and early career professionals who work in the alternative protein industry, where they discuss their journeys and deliver advice on how you can start a career in this revolutionary field. I realized that in my past 22 episodes, only 2 have discussed engineering roles, and I haven't even discussed the most applicable of them all, which is mechanical engineering. This is somewhat ironic, given that it is what I studied. Not only does this episode highlight the experience of a mechanical engineer, Bryce Rogers, who is working in the alternative protein industry, but it also showcases the perspective of a recent mechanical engineering graduate, Natalie Fernandez, who is searching for a job in the industry. Bryce is a project engineer at Edge Foods, a New York-based cell culture media and growth factor B2B startup for cultivated meat companies. He previously worked for high-impact engineers and has a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Southern California. Natalie is a recent mechanical engineering graduate from the University of Waterloo, seeking roles in the alternative protein industry. She also co-founded the Waterloo Alt Protein Project. Here's my conversation with Bryce and Natalie, where they explain their approaches to searching for jobs in the alternative protein industry coming right out of university, and where they offer advice to others aiming to follow a similar path. Welcome, Bryce and Natalie, to the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast. I'm so delighted to have you both on the show today. This is a very special occasion, the first time on the show having 2 guests at the same time, so this will be very interesting.
Thanks for having us, Jeffrey.
Yeah, very, very excited to be on here.
Me too. I'm really excited about it. Feel honored to be invited.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, as a starting point, maybe you guys want to give a brief little background on yourselves. Bryce, you can start off.
Yeah, sure thing. So I'm Bryce. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I grew up in California, outside San Francisco in some suburbs, went to school in LA. And just several months ago, I flew to New York City when I got a job at a cultivated meat adjacent startup. So that's kind of my life in short. I guess other relevant information would be that I studied mechanical engineering and I graduated in 2022. So it's just been a little over a year. And in between starting my current job at Edge Foods, I worked at an organization called High Impact Engineers. And I was doing that part-time for several months while figuring out what I wanted my first full-time move to be.
Great. And Natalie, you want to give a little brief bio on yourself?
I'm Natalie. I'm from Toronto. I also did mechanical engineering in university. I just graduated in 2023, so just a couple months ago. My main connection with alternative protein is that I learned about it through effective altruism. I did an intro to EA fellowship, and that's where I learned about alternative proteins. And I found out that there were no official alt protein projects in Canada. And so I saw that as a neglected area where I could make high impact if I took it on. So I started the Waterloo Alt Protein Project. We are currently in our 3rd semester as an official GFI Alt Protein Project. However, we've been doing work since 2021. One thing I would love to plug is our website, www.altprotein.ca, especially if you're a university student. It has this career guide that our lovely host, Jeffrey, created. So if you're interested in working in the alt protein industry but aren't sure on how your university major relates, definitely check it out.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Natalie, for the shout out. And I've always been very impressed with how far you've taken the Alt Protein Project at Waterloo.
Thank you.
So I guess for some context for the listener, why this episode came to be was, funnily enough, at the same conference where we all first met in person back in February with the Effective Altruism Global Conference, was where the idea for this episode came from. Actually, it was Brennan Wilkerson at Talist. He suggested, when I told him about my podcast, that it would be interesting to have the perspective of someone who's currently looking for a job in the alternative protein industry, juxtaposed with someone who recently got a job in the alternative protein industry. And that's where I thought of both of you guys. One other thing that I also wanted to highlight and felt was really unique about both of you in particular is the fact that you both studied mechanical engineering. And that's something I have yet to highlight on this podcast, which is somewhat ironic because that is the area of study which I did. So The listener now actually has the opportunity to hear about 3 stories of mechanical engineers and alternative proteins for this episode. So it's extra unique in that sense. To start off then, Natalie, what interests you the most about pursuing a career in the alternative protein industry?
So when I found out about alt proteins, what really drew me in were kind of the many different reasons someone could either work in the alt protein industry or maybe just support causes. One of them, of course, being animal rights, but the one that really spoke to me was the environmental aspect of it all. Just learning about how many emissions and how much water and how much carbon is used in the factory farming industry, those facts were always very shocking to me. And then seeing the potential of the alternative protein industry to reduce those numbers, that potential really spoke to me. So my main reason for wanting to pursue a career is to kind of work on helping the environment adjacently. Broadly, I'm interested in climate change and preventing it in any way I can. And then just due to the work I did in university, which happened to be in alternative proteins, I just see a really good connection there that I could pursue.
Mm-hmm. I totally get that. And there's definitely a lot of benefits to alternative proteins, as you mentioned. So it's a very multifaceted industry in that sense. Bryce, now that you have a job related to alternative proteins, can you maybe elaborate more on what your motivation was to leave your role at High Impact Engineers and transition to alternative proteins?
So briefly paint a picture of my life over the past year and a half or so. So I graduated from school in Los Angeles, and I really kind of dragged my feet to apply for jobs. And so I was kind of in the job search for a while. And I was actually volunteering for this organization, High Impact Engineers, on the side while searching for a paid job. And High Impact Engineers is this social impact organization for physical engineers. So that's chemical, mechanical, aerospace, basically all engineers except computer science, because we felt they were sort of served in different ways by different organizations. But then High Impact Engineers acquired some funding, so it became paid. And I was like, sweet, I don't have to look for a job anymore. And that was fantastic. I really love High Impact Engineers, and it was great working with them. Jess and Sean rock, if I can shout them out. And it was just a great experience. But I knew it was temporary from the beginning, because I knew that out of college, I wanted to get an engineering job. And this was related to engineering, but it was more community organization for engineers. I wasn't doing engineering work myself. And so it was an awesome adventure, and it was very fulfilling, and I really enjoyed it. But I knew that I wanted to pivot eventually. And I was kind of thinking about what I wanted that to be. And I ended up leaving because I basically decided I had been there long enough, and I wanted to pivot to something that was full-time and directly engineering related. And so that was the motivation for leaving. And so my motivation for transitioning to an alternative protein job was I wasn't actually directly gunning for alternative proteins and nothing else. My original vision when I was kind of transitioning away from High Impact Engineers, I kind of had 2 main things on my mind. I wanted a job that was directly engineering related, and I wanted to move to New York City just because I thought that'd be really fun. And I have some friends here. And so I started looking for engineering jobs that were interesting to me in New York City. And I was really hoping that it would be a job that felt socially impactful, such as something related to climate change or alternative proteins, or something else that felt immediately valuable or immediately beneficial to the common good. But it didn't have to be. And so some of the jobs I was looking at, I was definitely interested in alternative proteins because, like Natalie, I'd been exposed to alternative proteins through effective altruism, and I was very interested in them. But it didn't have to be alternative proteins. And I was just sort of applying for lots of engineering related jobs. And this is the one that landed, this engineering role at Edge Foods. And I feel really lucky that it did, because I really love Edge, and it's been a great engineering experience working there. And it allowed me to move to New York.
Well, glad to hear that. And what was that transition like, moving from High Impact Engineers to your role now at Edge Foods?
Job to job, there wasn't much of a transition because I took some time off in between the jobs, so it wasn't too bad. And High Impact Engineers was remote and part-time, and then I had a few weeks between the end of that and the start of Edge Foods. But the transition into the job at Edge Foods, I'd say I felt very prepared in some ways, and I had a lot to learn in other ways. In some ways, it felt like my role at high impact engineers and just other school and internship experience and stuff. I had experience with professional communication and organization and engineering projects and stuff like that. But at the same time, I still felt like I was fresh out of college, didn't have too much professional engineering experience, and I was jumping straight into a startup, which is not necessarily a traditional engineering environment. And I do a lot of miscellaneous stuff, and it's different every day, and it's stuff I really enjoy. But it's also a lot to keep up with and a lot to learn and a lot to feel like I am learning the job as I go. So in a way, it feels like I'm transitioning all the time, week to week and month to month at the job. But I'd say all in all, the transition has been really exciting and educational, albeit difficult at times.
Fair enough. Yeah. And I think that's just the nature of life at a startup, is just things are constantly changing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Natalie, what has been your strategy towards finding a job in the industry?
So there's a few methods I've been using. While I was still in school, I would be cold emailing companies. I think the thing about the alt protein industry is that a lot of the companies are startups, like Bryce said. And so startups don't always have either the funding or the positions available for co-ops or new grads. So cold emailing has been one of my main strategies, because then I get to kind of make my case a little bit in the email itself. And during school, I had some luck getting some co-op interviews from that. Going to EA Global, the conference in San Francisco, was also helpful. I was able to talk to a lot of like-minded people in person. And so that kind of helped, because they got to know my name and my face. And while I realized a conference isn't the most easily accessible kind of job search, if you do have the opportunity, definitely take your time to network while you're there. Specifically for alt protein jobs, I've been using Climate-Base, Talist, and GFI job boards. Similar to Bryce, I'm not super picky about the job I want when I graduate. I just want to do something socially good, like he said. If it could be in alternative proteins, that's ideal. But anything to do with kind of preventing climate change, I'm interested in. And so when I'm on these job boards, it can be kind of overwhelming if you don't set any filters. So I've kind of narrowed it down by some other categories instead. When it comes to alt protein, I feel like mechanical engineers are already pretty limited. A lot of the jobs are more bio-related or software engineering related. So that's one filter that kind of reduces the amount of jobs to look at. And then also geography or location. I really resonate with what Bryce said about working in New York. There's definitely some places I would prefer to work, but ensuring that there's an alt protein or some climate related company in the geography where you want to work can be difficult sometimes.
Yeah, that's fair. And were there any other resources that you've been using that have been really helpful?
Honestly, the job boards have been the most fruitful for me. I think that it gives you an idea of what kind of jobs are out there. Something else I've kind of struggled with is with this kind of new age of startups and alt protein companies. A lot of companies try to be hip, and so their job title won't be mechanical engineer. It could be like design genius or something that you wouldn't actually search up. So kind of leaving the filters broad when you go on these job boards. You can find other job boards that are kind of related to sustainability or environmental work or climate activism or animal welfare. I'm sure there are specific job boards for all of those. But yeah, maybe when you first go on them, I would recommend leaving no filters and just looking at the kind of jobs that are there. Because you might see that you're qualified for a job and really want a job, but you just would never have thought of the title yourself.
Yeah, no, very good piece of advice. So Bryce, now that Natalie has shared some of her strategies and resources and experience trying to find a job, can you provide a brief summary of what your job experience was like and how it may be similar or different to Natalie's experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think about my post-undergrad job search in two discrete chunks, a pre-high impact engineers chunk and a post-high impact engineers chunk. During the first one, I wanted to get a full-time engineering job in Los Angeles, and the second, I wanted to get a full-time engineering job in New York City. My strategy during the two chunks varied significantly because the first one, I view it as having been unsuccessful, and the second one being successful. And during both of them, I employed a lot of similar strategies to Natalie, but also some different ones, and there was a handful of things that didn't work very well for me. When I was job searching in LA, I was mostly cold applying to various job postings online that had been posted on many of the boards that Natalie mentioned, like LinkedIn. I did also try to use some other industry and interest specific job boards, like Natalie mentioned. However, I kind of struggled to get value out of those. I think maybe I was using sort of the wrong ones or something like that, but I often found that they weren't up to date or relevant. So yeah, I was mostly cold applying, not messaging anyone, not emailing anyone, just cold applying to applications and kind of pumping them out. I probably applied to like over 200 jobs like that and got a handful of interviews, but no offers, which was very discouraging. And I was getting pretty stressed out about it because it had been probably 4, 5, 6 months after graduating and I didn't have a job yet, which I felt bad about, even though that's very normal. And fortunately, the organization High Impact Engineers, which I had been volunteering for at the time, got some funding. So when that came through, I was like, all right, I'm in business. I don't have to keep looking for a job. However, I always knew that I wanted that to be temporary. And so I was doing that part-time for several months. And then once I eventually decided I wanted to move to New York, I began part 2 of my job search. And I went back to the drawing board a bit because the first time was unsuccessful. It was very discouraging. I felt like I spent a lot of time and energy in a frustrating and non-fruitful way. And so I decided to be a little more scrappy, I guess you could say. And I used most of the same sites like LinkedIn and Google. But this time, when I found jobs that I was specifically interested in, I sought out people who were hiring for those jobs on LinkedIn and then messaged anyone I could. And that was how I ultimately got the job at Edge Foods, which was I found the guy who's now my boss, messaged him on LinkedIn, and we had a conversation. And there's still always a degree of luck in this stuff, but I found that I had a lot more fruitful interactions and interactions that felt like they're actually going somewhere once I took up that strategy. So yeah, it seems like my job search strategies and resources have been pretty similar to Natalie's, maybe with the exception that it sounds like she's been using the job boards a little more effectively than I have.
Thanks, Bryce, for sharing your experience. And to give the listeners another perspective, I'll briefly touch on mine here. Through my job hunting process, I've gone through it twice now, trying to find a job in the industry. And both times, what has helped me the most definitely is networking and reaching out to people. Sometimes it is, as you mentioned, Bryce, just cold emailing people or cold messaging people on LinkedIn. That has been extremely useful. But other times, leveraging people that you know, your sort of weak ties or people on the edge of your network, because they can help get you to other people who are not currently in your network. Because people who are close to you, they mostly know people who are already in your network. So you really want to leverage those people who are kind of on the outside that you have a little bit of a relationship with, and they can help you further expand your network. That is probably one of the best pieces of advice I can ever give. And that has been the main reason that I was able to get both of my jobs in the alternative protein industry. And one thing, maybe not necessarily a resource per se, but something that has been beneficial for me, at least to keep track of all the people that I've ever networked. I just have a spreadsheet where I have all people that I've met, where I met them, the date that I met them, my connection to them, what they do, where they're located, and unique things about them. That has been very useful, and I've been trying to go back and say, oh, what was this person again? And who might they be able to connect me with? So that'd just be a little helpful tip for others who want to get into the industry. I'll just give a quick little plug to High Impact Engineers because they did a podcast with me, which I elaborate more extensively on my experiences in the industry. And I don't want to get into it too much on this episode. So I'll put a link in the show notes to that episode if anyone wants to hear more specifically about my experiences. But I want this episode to be mainly focused on you two. So Natalie, what other challenges have you encountered in your job search? I know you alluded to some of them there being trying to find mechanical roles and trying to find roles in your desired location.
Yeah, so I would say that one of the main problems I've run into in my job search is finding mechanical engineering jobs specifically in the alt protein industry. I just feel like where they're currently at, the most in demand kind of engineers are software engineers or computer scientists or chemical biological engineers. So I do feel like my skill set lacks a little bit in those areas, but I'm trying to see how else I can fit into the alt protein industry. And that's kind of what I alluded to before with finding roles that may not have a title that you would think to look up. Sometimes I find even titles of project manager or special projects or something like that end up being roles that my mechanical engineering background qualifies me for. So I would say that's the main challenge. So 2022 summer, I did a internship in Portland, Maine, and it was the best internship I experienced. For context, students at the University of Waterloo do 5 to 6 internships by the time they graduate if they do the engineering program. And so of my 6 internships, the one I did in the US was amazing. And I think that was partially due to the work. So it was for an ocean health company. And I felt like I was doing good work and working for kind of a climate tech company. And the other half of that was just the geography. Out there, I was working on the ocean once a week. There were tons of hiking trails nearby. So really good quality of life. That's something I'm trying to balance. At this point in my career, I'm very early stages. I do have 6 internships worth of experience, but I'm still in a position where I just want to learn and gain more skills and build upon the skills that I already have. So I'm trying to keep a pretty open mind when I'm applying to jobs, which is both challenging and good because it kind of expands the amount of jobs that I end up applying for, but challenging because your percentage for interviews to applications ratio is quite low. And so that can be a little bit disheartening. Bryce talked about kind of like those online job applications. So I've done a ton of that. Plug and chug, fill out the form. And yeah, I realized that half the time a human is probably never even going to read that application. And so I think a challenge I've encountered or I'm kind of struggling with dealing with is just how to do it efficiently. Like there are tons of ways to go about job searching like we touched on before. But sometimes I feel like I'm spending so much time for so little gain. Or I do end up getting interviews, but then they don't progress from there.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, at least you're getting interviews and building that experience and sort of getting you in that routine can help you for when you actually get the interview for the job that will eventually lead to the one that you get.
Yeah.
On the note of looking for jobs that aren't necessarily mechanical engineering related, I always try to encourage people to not be too pigeonholed, for lack of a better term. The role that I have now isn't mechanical engineering at all, in the traditional sense at least. It would more likely fall under chemical engineering because I'm a process engineer for context. And it kind of goes to show that you're going to do a decent amount of learning on the job. So as long as it's tangentially related and you have enough skills that are needed for that job, then I don't think necessarily the title should be a deterrent or defining factor.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's really important to look through job descriptions, even though it might mean an extra click when going through online job boards. I think it's totally worth it because a job title itself isn't entirely descriptive of what the job could entail. I'm interested in a lot of things. Obviously, I am interested in mechanical engineering, and I've had a few mechanical design roles. I think that it would be really cool to get a mech design role in an alt protein company or a climate tech related company, but the odds of that, just looking through job boards, seem pretty low to me. So I've kind of expanded on not only what my university degree is, but also just my interests and what I've gotten experience in, even if it wasn't included in my job title. There are many times where I've been a design engineer or a sales engineer or a process engineer, and I end up working in marketing or I end up doing some project management. And I find that I really enjoyed getting to do those tangential roles. They weren't always related to engineering, but it would help the company in general. And this mostly happened at startups, smaller companies where you end up wearing different hats and getting to gain other skills. So I'm happy I've gotten the chance to kind of explore different departments, not just engineering. I'm hoping it'll give me a bit more of an edge when I'm searching for jobs in climate tech and alt protein industry.
All right. And speaking of edge, Bryce, Can you explain what Edge Foods does?
Yeah, of course. So at Edge, we don't make any meat ourselves, but what we do is produce growth factors, which are a key ingredient to cultivated meat and one of the most expensive inputs. It's one of multiple price bottlenecks to the affordability of cultivated meat. And Edge, we basically grow genetically engineered cells in bioreactors. Those cells have genes inserted into them that cause them to express growth factors. So basically, we grow the cells, they excrete growth factors, we harvest that, and then we sell that product to cultivated meat companies.
Wow, that's quite fascinating. And can you elaborate more on what your specific role there is?
So my role at Edge is as a project engineer, and I think about my engineering work as falling into two main buckets, which are bioprocess and hardware. And I think about the bioprocess as figuring out what the cells want and need, and the hardware stuff is figuring out how to actually physically give the cells what they want. And so the bioprocess is thinking about the conditions that the cells are in, like temperature and pH and how much we feed them and what we feed them, things like that. And figuring out what is optimal for our cells. So what makes them grow the fastest, what makes them the most dense, what makes them live the longest and produce the most growth factors so that we have the highest yields possible. And then on the hardware side of things, that's figuring out the physical equipment to achieve those conditions that we elucidated through our bioprocess research. So I look into things like bioreactors and sensors and controls and pumps and all of the bits and pieces that make up a cell culture system. And I generally don't design like the individual components. Those are all like off-the-shelf components. But I contribute to the overall system design of what we want to the parts we want to purchase and how we want to assemble it all together to a unified system. And in addition to the bioprocess and hardware engineering stuff, I help out with a few other miscellaneous things at the company as well, just because we're a small team and there's lots that needs to be done. So we all pitch in on things that require completion, even if they don't necessarily fall directly within sort of our job description. Kind of like how Natalie was mentioning earlier, that job titles aren't always entirely descriptive of the job that they title. And the main non-engineering responsibility that I've taken up is techno-economic modeling, which basically involves making a predictive model of how much it will actually cost us to produce our product at various scales.
That's quite a lot, it seems like.
It feels like a little too much sometimes. Sometimes I feel like I'm on the seat of my pants in terms of learning day by day on the job. Yeah, but it's a lot of fun.
Fair enough. I guess question for Natalie then is, how does that job description compare to what your perceptions of mechanical engineering and just engineering roles in general in the alternative protein industry are like?
I think a couple of the job description lines that Bryce detailed reminded me of mechanical engineering jobs. Bryce, when you were talking about maybe not designing the components of hardware or design the hardware itself, but going through what is available online or seeing what other companies have used and making a list for purchasing, that's kind of more what I envisioned as a mechanical engineering job in the alt protein industry. I'm sure there are also mechanical engineers who are at that high level designing extruders, designing different process equipment. So that's another role I envisioned. And then the vision I had for mech eng roles in alt protein industry was probably more similar to a process engineer, or at least in my head as a process engineer role. And that has more to do with manufacturing optimization. So just kind of the layouts of alt protein factories, looking at the overall process. Actually, what you said about working on the bioprocess may fit into this as well. But I guess in my head, I didn't see a lot of crossover between bio-related skills and a mechanical engineering role. So that does surprise me a little bit. But it does also make me feel better because, like I said, the roles that I enjoyed the most during co-op is ones where I got to wear different hats and do things that were outside of my comfort zone. Honestly, I especially like doing things that I didn't really get to cover in school because it's just it feels like another way for me to learn more and gain more education. And that aspect is really cool for me.
It's good that you noted that. And one thing I want to add on to that would be the company I work for now, New School Foods. I have a mechanical engineering background, but I'm doing more of a process engineering type role, which involves, at least where we are right now, kind of two things. One of them is more on the project management side, working with contractors and consultants to coordinate and build out our first pilot production facility. And on the other side is more of the equipment procurement. And this is where having that background in more traditional mechanical engineering is very useful. So getting a good understanding of how different pieces of equipment work and the processes involved in those has been really useful for me. So having that base background has been very instrumental. So that's more of the mechanical engineering side of things for my particular roles, just in process engineering. But then there's also a couple mechanical engineers at our company who are doing your more traditional mechanical engineering, where they're doing a lot of CAD design and prototyping and building out small lab scale versions of some of the large scale equipment that we're going to be testing so that we can still function on the lab and do our certain processes. And that has also been very helpful for our company. So there's a wide range of applications for mechanical engineering within the alternative protein industry. It's just kind of what I wanted to highlight there.
I think that's really good for people, especially at my stage, kind of getting into the workforce, to hear that there's lots of opportunity and lots of different types of opportunities. Because it can be really daunting looking for your first job outside of university, especially in such a specific industry.
Yeah, I was hella daunted.
Yeah, and as I sort of alluded to earlier about not necessarily looking for specifically a mechanical engineering job in alternative protein industry, having a more of a broader approach, even if you find a mechanical engineering job, not necessarily in the alternative protein industry, but in the food industry, that could help you build up your career capital and gain some more experience in the food industry to help you transition later on into the alternative protein industries. Because by that point, you'll be a much more desirable applicant.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also think pursuing the medical industry is also pretty adjacent to alt protein, just because it still has that kind of lab aspect, kind of bio-related.
Yeah, I totally agree, Natalie. And is there anything else, Natalie or Bryce, that either of you want to add or highlight to our listeners for them as a takeaway?
I think one takeaway I have is that it may be difficult to find a role right away. At this point, it's still kind of a niche industry, and so there's already a limited number of roles available, and then specific roles or internship roles, there's going to be even fewer of those. But even if you can't get a directly related all protein job right away, I think doing work or trying to get some sort of adjacent role can also be helpful. So like we were talking about earlier, either doing a engineering role in a similar industry like food or medical, or doing different roles that aren't necessarily engineering related, but still in the alt protein or food industry, will ultimately help you get to that end goal of having a mechanical engineering job, if that's what you desire in the alternative protein industry. Adjacent roles doesn't mean you failed. It just means you're taking one step closer to the future you envisioned.
Very well said, Bryce.
So I'm trying to think of some things that would have been helpful for me to understand earlier in the job hunt process, especially things that I learned through my blunders. And one recommendation I would give, even if this kind of falls under common sense advice, is to gain experience in different areas to the extent that you have access to those experiences.
I regretted not doing more internships and maybe trying out things that I might have been potentially interested in, a lot of which I know now I might not have been interested in, but would have been useful to know earlier and get experiences earlier and say that I had done something before. So that kind of falls into personal projects, extracurriculars, and internships, and even classes too. Those are very useful down the road, but maybe even more than that, and leaning less on the advice that you hear all the time. I'd say things that really helped me finally get a job after some misadventures was having a vision was really useful, which for me, that was moving to New York and getting an engineering job. I was like, I really want to do this and I'm going to be scrappy, try to make it happen. And I'm going to have a plan and I'm going to change my plan of how I'm going to get it if it's not working. Optimizing for something that will be exciting for me and will be growthful. I'm really lucky in my journey in many different ways. The education I was able to get and the place I've been able to live and stuff like that, and all the support I've had. But something that I felt like I actually had to grind for myself was keep trying stuff until I got lucky and landed something I was really happy with. It's all along the way. I feel like I needed to just keep doing cool random stuff that I liked that felt good in some way, like a lot of effective altruism stuff or research or internships, maintaining faith and keep trying, being an active participant in my life and pursuing things that felt forward until something stuck. Because a lot of things didn't stick, but eventually something did. If I ever feel like I need another change, I want to have a vision again and pursue that until something sticks again.
I totally resonate with that. It's basically manifestation. I did that with my job in Portland, Maine. Instead of being specific about the job title or job work, I was specific about location. I was like, for my last co-op term, I want to work outside of the country and I want to be working on some sort of green initiative. And so I ended up working for an ocean health company in the States. And so I only got that job a month or 3 weeks before I was supposed to start. So I was hanging on. I did have other offers, but I'm really glad I did because that was my goal from the start and it worked out. And I think manifestation was a big part of it.
That's really awesome. And I fully agree with the manifestation approach. And that's a much more succinct way to describe what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I'd just like to make more clear, Bryce, your point about regretting not exploring. All of us being fairly young and early in our careers, we should really prioritize more about exploring and figuring out what we do and what we don't like, because that'll pay dividends later on. When we've done enough exploring, you can transition more to actually honing in on what you enjoy, because at that point you've gained enough information to know what you like and what you're good at.
Yeah, totally agree there. Sometimes you'll never know that you enjoy doing something if you don't try it. I didn't know I had a passion for marketing until I just got that opportunity through work or saw an opportunity for it and asked if I could be a part of it. So don't knock things till you try them.
Very true.
Yeah. And one final thought that I had is don't be too hard on yourself. This is something I could have benefited from hearing and still need to tell myself sometimes. It took me many a month before I found my first full-time job. And I've heard a similar story from a lot of other people where it takes close to a year after graduating. And it's really hard and it's a hard world to navigate. That's honestly one of the number one things I would tell someone or my past self or my current self is to not be too hard on yourself with all the stuff. And last thought is, in addition to what job you want to have, in job searching, think about what kind of life you want to have too, because that's very important as well, if not more important.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm seeing a lot of my friends and peers go through it right now with us all graduating. A lot of people were lucky enough to find jobs. A lot of people are kind of taking a break to travel just because of the current economic climate. And then a lot of people are stuck in a lull, either job searching or kind of having no luck. So definitely don't be too hard on yourself. I think taking a year after you graduate to find your first full-time, I think that that's totally normal. And you shouldn't compare your timeline to someone else's. Everyone has different goals when it comes to jobs. Like we talked about the role, the description, the location. And so everyone is going to land that ideal job at their own pace.
I absolutely agree with that. When I was graduating and I would look on LinkedIn and see other people who already had jobs at these flashy companies, I would be sad. The comparisons, they're harmful.
Yeah.
All right. I think this is a good point to end it then. We've had quite a good conversation. I appreciate you both willing to take the time to come on the podcast and showcase your experiences and your challenges and struggles and offering advice to listeners. So hopefully that'll help them on their journey.
Yeah, thanks so much again for having us, Jeffrey. I really enjoyed just getting to talk about my job approach, and I'm hoping other people will maybe start a conversation online to see how other people are looking for jobs in the alt protein industry right now. A quick plug for myself. If you're hiring, DM me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for having us, Jeffrey. It was super fun. Big fan of your podcast.
and just of you in general. It's an honor to be on here, and I hope that I said something useful.
I hope that Bryce and Natalie's insights demonstrate that being persistent and networking can really give you an advantage in your job search. Also, this episode emphasizes that there are a wide range of different roles available for mechanical engineers in the alternative protein industry, including design, project management, sales, etc. This is why there's a place for everyone, including you, to be a part of the alternative protein revolution. An excellent resource for finding a job in the alternative protein industry is Talent's matchmaking service, which you can sign up for to receive personal job recommendations based on your profile and preferences. A link is provided in the show notes. If you want to learn more about careers in the alternative protein industry, please follow the Cultivating Careers in Alternative Proteins podcast on Instagram for weekly posts about episode releases, alternative protein resources, job boards, career advice, and so much more.